Hello, and welcome to Privacy Roadmap Insights from Our Adventure. We can go to the next slide. I am Casey Brandt, a Standards Coordinator for Conexxus, and your moderator for today will be Tim Tang, Director of Enterprise Solutions for Hughes. Tim has over 25 years of experience developing enterprise solutions, and at Hughes, he studies the market and technology trends across various industries. Tim is also the Vice Chair of the Conexxus Data Privacy Working Group. Go to the next slide. So for the agenda for today, I'm going to go through a few housekeeping slides, give you some information about Conexxus. Tim will then introduce our presenters. They'll give their presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Go to the next slide. All right, so a little bit of housekeeping. There will be available on demand for this webinar, so the replay will be available at conexxus365.org. You can send questions directly through the Zoom interface for the Q&A section. Make sure you send those in as soon as they pop up in your head, because at the end, we want to make sure we answer as many as we can. PCI credits are available for qualifying live events, so please contact us if you're interested in that. Go to the next slide. So this disclaimer is just something that we have to put in. It just shows that the views and opinions are solely of the speakers and not of Conexxus itself. Go to the next one. A huge thank you and shout out to our 2024 annual sponsors at Conexxus. The extra support is really appreciated and allows us to continue the work that we do on behalf of the industry. So a little bit about Conexxus. We are a nonprofit technology organization. Our membership really does the heavy lifting. We provide a neutral forum where retailers and vendors can network and come together to create standards and solutions that are beneficial to our industry. We educate through white papers and events like this one at Conexxus365, and we advocate on a technical level at other organizations to help steer the conversations around standards and policies so that changes don't negatively affect your business. So Conexxus365 is an educational webinar series with monthly webinars. So make sure you're subscribed to our email list and that you check the website to be notified of future webinars and follow us on LinkedIn. Our next two webinars will be with GS1 in November and December. The first one will be discussing Sunrise 2027 at a high level, and the December one will go into more depth. You can go to the next slide. Alrighty, and now I'll turn it over to Tim Tang to introduce our speakers.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Tang, and it's my privilege to introduce you to Carolyn O'Neill. She's the manager of data management at Maverik, Kum Go. Carolyn has been with Maverik for 10 years working in data management, project management, operations, and accounting. She currently leads the data privacy team at Maverik and is responsible for the execution of the privacy program. Adam Fellers is the senior manager of information security and compliance at Maverik, Kum Go. Adam has overall responsibilities for the information security and the IT GRC programs. He has a deep professional background working in the retail industry in various cybersecurity, operations, accounting, loss prevention, data analytics, and GRC roles over the past 25 years. And I will turn it over to Carolyn and Adam.
Well, thanks a lot, Tim. And thank you all for being here and giving us the opportunity to speak on this important subject. I'm going to start with another legal disclaimer. Legal counsel is vital when you're setting up a privacy program. Circumstances and legal requirements can vary a lot between state to state, and sometimes even within a state between different companies in the same state. Depending on the circumstances, those requirements can vary quite a bit. Carolyn and I are nowhere near being close to lawyers, so it's important that you take what we're going to be doing is kind of telling you what our experience was like. And when you're building your own privacy program, you want to make sure that you have your own legal counsel involved to help you make sure that you're on the right track. With that out of the way, at Maverik, we call ourselves Adventure's First Stop. And implementing a privacy program, I got to tell you, was definitely an adventure, fraught with perils and uncertainties, especially at the beginning. So what will be our goal here today is to kind of demystify things a little bit and to help organizations know what to expect on their own adventure. We're going to talk about like the challenges that we faced. Every project has to have a scoping phase, building people infrastructure, the data mapping, and finally the execution of our privacy program. And then we'll open up for questions. So as I said at the very beginning, we were really kind of overwhelmed. It was really like speaking a whole new language. There were all kinds of terms that had ambiguous definitions and could change depending on what state and what legislation you were talking about. The legislative requirements are a lot of times very vague and ambiguous, and you have to really use your legal team to interpret them. The scope as well. We talk about what should be in scope whenever you're doing a privacy program, and that's going to bring us to our first poll, and that is someone's name by itself considered personal information? It's real easy, yes or no. Is someone's name by itself considered personal information? Because this is a question that we grappled with when we were first starting off. And so moving on, our data mapping was lacking. Now, obviously we are beholden to PCI. So when it came to credit card data, we knew how we were receiving credit card data. We knew if we were storing it, where we stored it, and how, and if it left, how it left, and what all those channels were. We knew all that stuff. That was great. But when it came to personal information, we really didn't have a clue, like, oh gosh, where to start. It could be everywhere, right? And so that was something that we had to really explore out. We did have a privacy policy, but we were staring down the barrel of a hard legal deadline, and it needed a lot of work. We didn't have any resources dedicated to privacy. There was no real governance. We had no way to handle privacy requests. If someone came to us and said, I know you have my personal data, and I want you to delete every trace of it throughout your environment and throughout all the environments with whom you've shared it, or I'll go to the AG and you'll have to pay a lot of money in fines. We didn't really have a way to deal with that. We didn't have, in terms of like infrastructure, we didn't have any human infrastructure in terms of like training, awareness, roles and responsibility. None of that was defined. We didn't have any tools that were made specifically for this purpose. And we knew that we were going to have to create a process that would have to be dynamic and be able to adapt to changing regulatory environments. And we'd have to decide how we were going to handle requests from residents in states that had no privacy legislations or differing privacy legislations between between different states. And so, Carolyn, I think I've done a pretty good job of getting everybody's anxiety amped up. And so I'm going to leave the hard part of like telling us how. I'm going to leave it to you. How do we even start?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And certainly blood pressure was raised at the beginning there, trying to figure out what our approach was going to be. So really we started out with, as Adam mentioned, we needed to scope the project. We needed to understand what was in scope, what wasn't in scope. There was a lot of conversations with our legal team, as Adam mentioned, kind of hypothetical questions, really trying to understand if we were collecting the data, what was going to be, if someone wrote down somebody's name on a piece of paper, how are we going to remove that? So when we started the program in 2019, we were looking at the 2020 CCPA legislation as our first initial scope. And that was our main focus. So that's where we really defined what we were going to be doing going forward. As you see now on this map, that landscape has changed a lot over the 4 years since CCPA. And we've been able to adapt with that with the privacy program that we have. So once we kind of knew what the legislature's scope was, and specifically the CCPA scope, we started to talk to our legal team again, just hypothetical. What are we doing? How are we doing it? And then we, going back to Adam's question, was a name by itself considered personal information? And the answer is actually no. It has to be name plus something additional. You can share your name with 100,000 other individuals. It does have to be including additional contact information with an individual. So an email, a phone number, some way to contact you in particular. So that was like a really great, exercise to do on was just name part of the scope. So once we kind of knew the scope, once we knew what we were looking for, we started to think about how do we gain exceptions to these requirements, right? And what we did here was data minimization. We wanted to focus on don't collect the information that we don't actually need, remove some of that personal information from our vendor feeds. We don't need to be sharing name, address, phone, date of birth with everybody. What we can do is minimize that data, anonymize that data, remove personal identifiable information, encrypt it, really just focusing on what do we actually need to do the business, and how do we minimize that data with our vendors and our requirements with the legislation. So at the beginning, as I mentioned, we started with CCPA. What we wanted to do as well was we wanted to practice. We wanted to practice without consequence. So once we built our privacy program, we actually opened up requests to any resident. And I know that sounds a little bit scary at first, but what we needed to do was focus on fine-tuning the process without consequence. We needed to really practice our awareness, our training, working with our vendors, establishing those relationships, and executing on the program without really having a legislative requirement to do so, so that we could really get down to the nitty-gritty and make sure that we knew what we were doing when it came to consequences, right? So getting back to some of our challenges, who was going to run this privacy program? So Adam will take us through that.
Yeah, and so we want to start off with another poll. And the poll is, when building the human infrastructure for a privacy program, what role is the most important? And we just kind of have like an open answer here for you to tell us who you think is going to be the most important when building your privacy program. So for us, we started off, we knew that this had to have executive buy-in. It's not gonna move, it's not gonna be successful unless there's a presence on the executive leadership team to really drive this forward and make it part of our culture overall. And so we started with our privacy committee, and this consists of 3 executives. The executive sponsor is our legal counsel. And then we had 2 executive partners. One was our CIO from IT, and then the other was our executive over HR. And these 3 really got together, kind of defined policy. They make the major strategic decisions when it comes to the program. And then we had the privacy team. And the privacy team is made up of managers who are responsible for the execution of that privacy program. Now, it started off, there were just 2 members, the 2 people who are presenting to you today, data management and information security. As we've matured, we've added 2 other members, the manager of governance, risk, and compliance, as well as the manager of customer service, because customer service is often the face that customers will see whenever they make a privacy request or things like that. So they're a key part of that process. And then we have our privacy stewards, or our privacy champions. And these are going to be, this is where the rubber meets the road. These are the representatives from each individual department who advocate for privacy. They do awareness throughout their team and kind of, help instruct people, this is how you need to handle sensitive data and PII. And then whenever it comes to privacy requests, they're the people who are performing those compliance tasks. And so if we go back to our poll question, there's lots of really, really great answers, but the really right answer to the poll question is all of them. It has to be an organizational effort. No one person or no one team is going to be able to make this work by themselves. So it's really important to have that buy-in throughout your organization. So now that we had some human infrastructure in place, it was time for the hard part, right? So we have all this data, and it was as if we had deep piled carpets and we had dumped buckets of glitter all over the place, and now we had to clean it up. And that sounds really hard, so I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn to tell us how we did that.
Yeah, so we started with what the exercise of data mapping. So if you already have a data catalog where you know where all of your data inventory and you know where all of your personal information is, this may be a quick exercise for you. For us, it was we need to get all of our feelers out. We need to talk to every individual pretty much at the company. What are they doing with personal data? How are they using it? So we started really with, again, department interviews. We scheduled many department interviews, just asking them, are you using personal information? What kind of personal information are you using? What is the business use case of that personal information? How are you storing it? What systems are you using? What is the security and controls? What is the retention of that data? How do you get it? Is someone filling out a form? Is someone, emailing it? And then also, are we sending it anywhere as well? So once we're storing it, are we sending it to additional vendors, sharing that? And then we also needed to know if any of that sharing constituted a sale of the data. So that was an important part, a big distinction on how we handled that request as well. So we really wanted to level set and establish a culture of privacy. We had many, campfire meetings where we talked about CCPA and the importance of, if you're using customer data, some of the controls and things that you should be thinking about. Don't download more than you need. Don't use more than you need. Really trying to go back to what is the business use case. And then again, going back to my earlier comments of minimization and anonymization. So really limiting the access to personal information. A lot of our analysts use customer data. However, they do not need the personal information included with that to make an educated marketing decision. So really trying to limit that and collect that information in a more comprehensive data map and data catalog so that we know where it is and how it's being used. So once that was complete and we knew exactly where all of our data was, we needed to translate that into our privacy policy. So Adam will go over how we review our privacy policy.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. And so we had our data map, we had our business use cases, and so now it was largely on our legal team to match that up with state laws. Tim, if you want to hit enter there, it's time for them to kind of look at all that, cook it all together, and then come up with a new and improved and compliant privacy policy. So if you hit enter again, so great, we have our policy. So we have our program in, and we did this once and we're done forever, right? We can just sit back. Well, no, unfortunately, that's not the case. This is an iterative process. Every time the business adopts a new technology, or every time we go into business with a different business partner, or every time there are legislative changes, we have to look at it and ask the question, how does this impact our program, and what changes to it do we need to make to maintain compliance? Now, sometimes those changes lead to technical requirements or changes that need to be made to our website or to our loyalty program or other customer-facing technology that has to be brought into compliance. This often includes managing cookies and accommodating global privacy controls. So once again, it's getting hard. So I'm going to hand it over to Carolyn.
Thanks, Adam. So we had a lot of technical changes, as we talked about there. So we had some requirements from the state legislation to have a web form, for example, right? That was brought up in 2023 with the enforcement of the CCPA. But so we had to create a web form for our tickets and our requests to come in. So that was one technical change we had to make and make available on our website. We also had some links to add on the website, some very specific requirements for your privacy choices at the bottom. We also implemented cookie consent on our websites, and we also really looked at, again, going back to just how are we passing data around. We had to go back and really look at the data minimization effort, and the anonymization effort. So we really took out a lot of the PI that was being transferred to vendors that really wasn't needed. So there was a lot of technical changes to our data feeds that was required. We also had a major effort on anonymizing our loyalty IDs and our transaction data set. Again, that was just an easy way for us to remove some additional information, some identifiers that really create that exception where it is anonymized. It can never be traced back to an individual. So we really did that to really help this effort. So there were a lot of technical changes that we needed to do. And that, as Adam mentioned, is up to the privacy team to see the execution of that and really drive that forward and make sure those technical changes are getting into production and customer facing. So once we did that, we really needed to, so again, we have the web form. So let's talk about kind of what the process is for the intake of those privacy requests and how we handle those in our program.
Yeah, so we have those technical adjustments in place, and we need to develop a workflow. How are we going to handle, like I said, whenever we get those requests saying, hey, I know you have my personal data, I want you to get rid of it, or I want you to show me what you have. We need to have a workflow, a process to follow. Now, this is really crucial because if you get in trouble with privacy, the most likely way it's going to start is with a request that you don't respond to properly. That leads to the customer complaining or the requester complaining, which then gets an attorney general to start sniffing around your program, right? So the first thing to really do is like figure out how you're going to take in these requests. Now, we really suggest like have a single intake channel. We were using email for a while. That started to get spammed, as Carolyn was mentioning, and so we have this. We implemented this web form that really helped cut down on the spam. I recommend using a tool that you already have in your environment. If you have a ticketing system that's external facing, that's what we have used, and it works really well. Once you have it, you need to go in. You need to acknowledge the request. Let the requester know, hey, we've received your request and we are looking into it. Give them an idea of like timeline, things like that. But then verify who the requester is. Because again, sometimes the request is not just, hey, delete my data. Sometimes it's, I want to know what data you're collecting on me. And before we go leaking data, we want to make sure that person's authorized to have that data. So next, we kind of come to a point where we have to choose your own adventure. And this is where we come up with our final poll question. And this is a choose your own adventure. And this is, you're going to choose between two different approaches. You can have one privacy program that complies with the most stringent aspects across all different privacy laws from all the different states and do that for every single request. Or you can have multiple privacy programs in effect for each of the different states, as well as states without legislation. Now, there's drawbacks to both approaches. For the first one, what that means is that you're probably going to be you're going to be fulfilling tasks and requests that you probably legally aren't required to. The second one, however, the drawback is that you're introducing a whole lot of complexity. Now, obviously, there's more than just these two options. There can be a spectrum, and you have to figure out where on that spectrum your organization fits. And that's going to have a lot to do with like the circumstances you're in, the states that you're in, that sort of thing. Once you have made that decision, you really kind of start assigning privacy tasks to your data stewards. And it's really important that you go through and train your data stewards on how they're going to perform those tasks. So a lot of times this is, if you share data with a third party, the data steward whose department is kind of owns that third party or does business with that third party, it's going to be their responsibility to go and make sure that third party is deleting that data. or if there's a particular repository that we are that their department owns, that where they're keeping data, it's their responsibility to go delete that data. So you need to make sure that the data stewards know what they need to do prior to assigning it out to them. And then once you've assigned it, you really need to track the task progress and follow up. I mean, everybody's busy, and this is nobody's full-time job. So a lot of times it can be something that falls off the plate. If you ask Carolyn, she'll tell you she's always having to tell me, Adam, you have tasks out there, go get them done. And I have to, oh, sorry, go get them done, and then we're good. You generally have 45 days to complete requests. So that's another reason why it's important to track that progress and just kind of check in every few days or every week and make sure that you're still on track to get it done. Now, once you've done all that, you got all the tasks completed, you're going to then close the request with the customer. And there's going to be a communication back to them. It's either going to be with a fulfillment, a partial fulfillment and partial denial, or just a full denial based on legal justifications. And as you can imagine, if you're gonna have a partial or full denial, you need to have those legal justifications documented and ready. As you build your process, it's really important that you make sure that it's scalable, because when you first open up, it's going to seem like just a trickle, and you'll be like, "Oh, this is super easy. We'll never have to, this will always be something we can just kind of do on the side and not something to worry about." But I'll tell you that the volume of privacy requests as you go on, it's not trending in a friendly direction. Carolyn, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, when we first started, we were just focusing on CCPA, or sorry, we were accepting requests from everybody, right? And we were doing the CCPA privacy request for everybody. So in 2020, we had only 26 requests. They were infrequent, not too terrible. In 2022, I think that those numbers there are a little bit fishy, but however, what we saw was that we saw a huge number of spam in that year. There was not a lot of actual requests coming in. And then in 2023, we saw a big jump, completing 172 requests that year. And then so far in 2024, we've completed 767 requests. So certainly a huge increase in privacy requests. We obviously saw some of our states that we operate heavily in introduce privacy laws. Colorado and Utah in particular. We saw most of our requests come from those areas, and that is our highest footprint for our stores as well. So really the headline here too also is that we acquired Kum Go during this time, and we applied the privacy program to Kum Go and are now accepting privacy requests and completing privacy requests for Kum Go as well. So introducing that environment into the scope of things certainly increased our ticket count as well. So certainly, as Adam said, it has to be scalable. We're constantly evolving this process and evaluating if this is how we want to continue going forward. But so far, things are going well, and we're completing requests on time and with our vendor partners, efficiently. So, Tim, I think we're now to our question and answers section.
Yes. So I will stop the share here. We have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one is with regards to data classification or categorization by use case. I was wondering if you could maybe speak to the different use cases that you think about as it relates to the types of data that you're dealing with, and kind of how that impacts your data privacy process.
Use cases. Yeah. So majority of our use cases are collecting loyalty data. So, collecting from our customers who are engaged in our Adventure Club program or our Nitro program. And then from there, there's a lot. I mean, we obviously have a lot that goes into that. We have mobile communication with our customers, different types of programs. And trying to think how to answer this question with what was the ending, so the use cases with it, and then how that impacts our privacy program?
Yeah, how you think about your and maybe in the context of like recognition, profiling, identification, the different types of data, and then just how you think about your process of managing that data.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to chime in as well.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is, whenever we're classifying data, obviously we want to make sure that personal data is going to be one of those. When it comes to use cases specifically, and how we build our program around that, it's really going to be about again what's required, and you say, okay, we have this use case. Well, what data elements, and that's really what we bake everything down to, is like there's specific data elements, full name, address, email, all those kind of things. What are the least number of data elements we need to fulfill that use case? If we don't need the email, well, then let's leave out the email. If we don't need the address, let's leave out the address. If we can anonymize and we don't need anything, we just need something to represent that specific person, then let's anonymize it. Let's use something. Let's use like hashing or something like that to anonymize it so it can't be tied back to a specific individual. And that removes it from scope, and then you don't have to worry about it. And de-scoping is really one of the biggest keys to simplifying your program.
Okay. There's another question here. Can you speak to some of the reasons why you might deny a data request?
Sure. Let's say, I'll just give a couple of examples. Let's say that a customer comes into your store. They are inebriated, they fall down, and they sprain their wrist. Okay, and then they want to take legal action against your store, against your company. They then file a privacy request saying, I want you to delete all my private data, including and private data. We probably didn't mention that, but private your personal information does include any images of you, including the video of you falling down when you were, stone dead drunk and spraining your wrist. Well, no, that is not good. That is not going to be something that we would be able to fulfill. We have there are carved out exceptions for business requirements, things like that. If a current employee wants to have all their data deleted, well, you can't pay them anymore if you do that, and you're required to pay them. So you're going to have these types of exceptions that are, just to do business and to fulfill other legal requirements. That's one of the other things, is if you have legal requirements to keep that data, no privacy legislation is going to override those legal requirements. So those are just some of the exceptions, Carolyn. I don't know if there were any other kind of examples that you've run into, but those were some of the ones that really popped out to us at first.
Yeah, those are the exceptions. And then going back to the denial, is really just a straight denial. Is we've searched our systems and we don't have your information. You haven't signed up for our loyalty program. And that would just be an easy, we don't have your data. This was a denial of the request. We don't have anything to delete or access or anything like that.
That's probably the most common one.
Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. Could you maybe describe the level of effort required to implement a data privacy program, and maybe how that effort changes in terms of time, resources, investments?
This was Carolyn, I'd say it's probably a year at least. I mean, it wasn't our full-time job, but we spent significant man hours. I'd say it was 10 hours a week or something like that for a year, probably, at least, do that. And this was across, Carolyn and I. There were other members. As I said, the privacy committee was deeply involved. Legal counsel probably even more so, because they're really responsible for kind of like crafting the whole thing to make sure that we're meeting legal obligations. So it is a significant amount of work, and the thing I would say is that it's a heavy lift to implement. When you first start off, it's pretty easy to go, as Carolyn's last slide kind of showed. It the maintenance of it is pretty easy, but you got to be prepared for more and more as your company grows, and more people know about privacy legislation, and more people realize that they have private data with you. You have to be prepared that your numbers are gonna steadily increase, and you need to make sure that you have the human capital ready to absorb those requests, because it's not going to slow down, and it does take some time.
And for our audience, if you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A to chat your questions in, and I'll try to get to them as we can. There's another question here about, can you speak to the business case for implementing a data privacy program? What's at risk?
It's a big risk. You should definitely, if you're collecting personal information, you should be looking to be compliant. If you are not compliant today and you are collecting personal information, you should really take a hard look at that and say, if we can't stay compliant, should we be collecting this information? Because it's more states are introducing bills, and depending on the applicability of your business in that state, you really want to make sure that you're handling this with urgency to get compliant. And really, it's a customer-facing thing. It's a trust thing with your customers, and you really want to make sure that you let them know that you value their privacy, you value the value that their data adds to our business. And so if they revoke that consent at any time, it's important that you're respecting of those privacy wishes.
In your presentation, you talked about the development of a data privacy culture in your organization. Can you maybe expand on that? What does a healthy data privacy culture look like, and how do you create one?
I think the biggest thing is making sure that all members, or at least most members, are aware as they're making changes to the environment that there is at least something in the back of their mind saying, oh, you know what, I am dealing with personal information here, whether it be for employees or whether it be for customers or even vendors. Vendors are scoped into a lot of this legislation. So if you have private contractors who are doing work for you, their personal information is in scope for a lot of this legislation. And just making sure that people are aware, you provide training, you provide communication, you have those data stewards who can hopefully help you do some of the heavy lifting, or at least some of the one-on-one. But yeah, you do have to communicate. It's something you need to drive. Like we said, it's going to fail if you don't have executive buy-in. And so having that, executive buy-in, I often say culture is from the ground up, but values need to come from the top down. And so the value on privacy is something you have to have executive buy-in. You just have to.
Can you speak to how you are working with your third-party suppliers as it relates to data privacy? What does that engagement look like?
Yeah, so when we bring on a new vendor or an existing vendor, we have a risk assessment that goes out to the vendor to look at if they are processing customer data for us, and kind of their controls and security around that data if they're hosting that for us. And then during the contract negotiations and things, we have a data processing addendum that is included that includes certain requirements that the vendor has with us to comply with privacy legislation, and what they can and cannot do with our personal information. And then really it's up to the data stewards and the privacy stewards to handle that relationship, to fulfill those requests with those vendors and make sure that we're compliant. So many times we have a new vendor coming online, and it's one of our first questions is, are they going to be handling customer data, and how do we bring them into the program? How do we handle requests? How do we make sure that we're compliant with that vendor? So it's really about
And
relationships and making sure that you're communicating with them on your expectations.
exactly. And one of the key ways that we can look that we found that you can kind of start to scope out some third parties is if they're not going to hold your customers' data for more than 45 days. Like if there's a retention policy and they are securely deleting that data within 45 days, well, that's the 45 days that you have for a request. So you don't have to include that vendor then. And that's, again, another way that we talk about scoping things out as much as you can will really simplify your program.
The data stewards concept was a very interesting role. Can you speak a little bit as to what are good characteristics of a good data steward? How did you pick these individuals?
These are people who usually are going to be more, if you're in information security, you usually know the people who are like every time they get a suspicious email, they're sending it to you, right? These are the people who are like, have more of a secure mindset, and they're really like sensitive to these types of matters. You find those people, you talk to them, you find out, are they passionate about protecting the privacy and the security of our customers' data, and those are the candidates that you want. Those are the people that you want in those fields. And then ideally, you provide them with the content and tips and tricks and things like that they can then hopefully kind of socialize out throughout their department and help raise that awareness and build that culture.
For many retailers, they're just kind of getting started. Based on your experiences, is there any guidance or advice that you would give them on how to get started?
I think
review our slide deck.
yeah, review the slide deck. I think data mapping is really important, like getting a handle on where you're storing data, and concurrently with that process, getting your legal counsel involved and looking at your privacy policies, and the different legislation that you'll be subject to. And again, always looking at, do we need this data? That's one of the first things. Like it's in information security and it's in information privacy. It's just good data hygiene. If you don't need data, get rid of it, because it's no longer an asset, it's a liability. And as soon as you don't need it anymore, it becomes a liability. Get rid of your liabilities. Delete it. Define a retention program. If you're storing everything forever, that's not good from a data hygiene practice, not good from a security practice, and it's definitely not good from a privacy practice. So much can be done if you just trim the fat and get rid of all the things that you don't need.
Excellent. Maybe just one last question. As you look down the road now, in the near future, how do you see data privacy changing? What are you trying to prepare for, or what are you watching out for?
I think there's going to be more and more states that come online with different privacy protections. There's always the thought that maybe it's going to be standardized and there's going to be some kind of federal action. Things are so fractious. I don't know that they'll ever get anything done at the federal level. I think that's a long time coming. But I do think that I think even in places that have legislation, they're going to start clamping down more, and there's going to be more and more requirements that start to be laid down. I usually look at California because they're going to be one of the leaders in terms of what's going to be the highest standard of privacy legislation. They'll continue to lead the way, I think, but I think just more and more requirements added into that legislation.
Well, Carolyn, Adam, thank you so very much for sharing your story. This has been immensely helpful for us to understand how you have tackled this challenge of data privacy. It's a great example for the industry to follow, and we just very much appreciate your openness and transparency in how to do this, very much so.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.